River's Diner had once been the beating heart of its neighborhood, a place where strangers turned into regulars and regulars became family. For over a decade, the small but beloved diner on the corner of Maple and Fifth had stood as a symbol of second chances. It wasn't just the food, though the fluffy pancakes and Southern-style fried chicken had their own kind of magic. It was the feeling, the welcome, the sense that everyone who walked through those doors mattered. Malcolm Rivers, the owner and founder, had built it from the ground up after returning from a rough patch in his own life. The diner was his redemption story, and through it, he had helped others find their own. Many of his staff had backgrounds that most employers would overlook. Former addicts, people with criminal records, or those who simply needed a fresh start. At Rivers, they were given one. No judgment, just a chance. But lately something felt off. It started as a whisper. A longtime customer, Ms. Dolores, mentioned how the girl at the register barely made eye contact anymore. Then a regular delivery driver said the new busboy had snapped at him. More and more, Malcolm noticed the smiles were thinner, the conversations shorter. The music still played from the old jukebox, but the laughter that used to rise above it was gone. He sat in his office one evening, the sun bleeding orange through the blinds, a half-eaten meatloaf sandwich on the desk beside him. His eyes scanned the feedback cards. One caught his attention. It read, "I used to love this place. Now I just feel like I'm in the way." Malcolm leaned back in his chair, troubled. He thought of all the years he had poured into the diner. The birthday parties, the community fundraisers, the kids who did their homework at the corner booth while their parents worked late shifts. What had changed? He pulled out an old photo from the drawer. It was taken the week the diner opened. Everyone in the picture was beaming. Big Tony, fresh out of prison and holding a tray of biscuits like it was gold. Brittany with pigtails and a shy smile. And Chad, standing tall in a crisp apron, proud to have a job after being laid off for months. Now the smiles were strained, and Malcolm couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. Something was happening in his diner, and he needed to find out what. Not through reports or second-hand comments. No, he had to see it for himself. Hear it with his own ears. The Rivers Diner he had built was slipping away. And Malcolm Rivers wasn't about to let that happen. The next morning, Malcolm stood in front of his closet, running his fingers over the familiar fabric of his usual button-ups and clean slacks. He passed them by. Instead, he chose an old flannel shirt, faded jeans, and a worn canvas jacket. His shoes were scuffed, his beard left untrimmed. From the back of the closet, he pulled out a duffel bag, frayed at the corners, once used when he first started the diner and couldn't afford much else. He left his phone at home. As he walked down the block toward Rivers Diner, the city felt different. Not because the streets had changed, but because of the weight in his chest. This wasn't a regular morning. He wasn't Malcolm the owner. Not today. He rounded the corner and saw the neon sign flickering weakly against the gray sky. Rivers Diner. It still read, but somehow the glow seemed dimmer than it used to. He paused across the street, watching as a small group of customers trickled in. A woman with 2 toddlers, an older man with a cane, a construction worker in a neon vest. Then he crossed. He pushed open the door, and the bell gave its familiar chime. The smell of fried potatoes and coffee hung in the air. It was all so familiar, yet something about the way people moved, the lack of eye contact, the silence between tables, confirmed his unease. He took a seat at the counter, 3 stools away from a man in a hoodie nursing a cup of coffee. No one greeted him. Chad was behind the counter, pouring a drink with one hand and scrolling his phone with the other. Brittany leaned against the soda machine, chewing gum lazily, her gaze locked on a small screen. Neither looked up. Malcolm cleared his throat softly. Brittany glanced at him, then turned to Chad and muttered, "Another one." Chad finally approached, eyebrows raised, mouth pulled into something between a smile and a smirk. "You gonna order, or?" Malcolm gave a slow nod. "Just coffee. Black." Chad poured it without saying a word. No welcome, no smile, no question about how his morning was. Just the cup, slid across the counter half full. Malcolm wrapped his hands around it and kept his head low. From his peripheral vision, he saw the two of them whispering again. He couldn't hear everything, not yet, but their tones were sharp, sarcastic, tired. More customers came in, and both Chad and Brittany seemed annoyed by it. One woman, clearly new, asked about the specials. Brittany rolled her eyes and muttered under her breath, "It's on the board, lady." The woman gave a nervous laugh, then sat down in silence. Malcolm watched every second. He had once told his staff that dignity wasn't something that came with a paycheck. It was something you offered freely to anyone who walked in. A warm smile, a kind word, a refill before being asked. That was the Rivers Diner way. But here he was, just another man at the counter, and already he felt unwelcome. The whispers grew louder. Malcolm picked up pieces of their conversation. Words like freeloaders and rehab hires. He heard his own name, too, said with a sneer. Malcolm's so busy playing savior, he forgot this is a business. His chest tightened, but his face stayed still. He sipped the bitter coffee, his hands steady even as his thoughts raced. So this was what it had become. A place where kindness was mocked and the mission was forgotten. But he wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. The lunch rush began to trickle in. Malcolm stayed at the counter, unnoticed, invisible. His coffee was cold now, but he didn't ask for a refill. He didn't need it. What he needed was to listen. Chad leaned against the prep station, talking too loudly. You see that guy in booth 4? Comes in every other day, orders the cheapest thing on the menu, tips like a ghost. Dude smells like motor oil. He laughed, loud and hollow. Bet Malcolm thinks that guy deserves a gold star for just breathing. Brittany snorted. Don't even get me started on that family that shows up with 6 kids and split one damn waffle between them. Place turns into a daycare. What is this? A soup kitchen. Malcolm's knuckles tightened around the edge of the counter. Chad continued, voice rising. And Tony. I mean, yeah, he's big and scary and whatever, but he only got this job because Malcolm's soft. You get out of prison and suddenly you're qualified to run a kitchen. Brittany giggled, tapping her nails on the counter. He acts like he owns the place half the time. Like just because Malcolm saved him, he gets to play manager. It's pathetic. Malcolm shifted slightly on his stool, but neither noticed. Their conversation was no longer whispered. It was casual, comfortable, like they'd been saying these things for a long time. More customers came in, some regulars, some new. Malcolm watched as Brittany took their orders without eye contact, sighing when someone hesitated. Chad tossed menus onto tables like throwing cards. The diner's energy was flat. Conversations between patrons were hushed, tentative. The kind of quiet that grows when people no longer feel welcome. A young man in a stained hoodie entered, looking hesitant. Malcolm recognized him, Jeremy, a dishwasher they'd hired through the neighborhood outreach program. He worked the early mornings, kept to himself, always polite. Chad spotted him and rolled his eyes. Look who's here, Mr. Silent Treatment. Brittany added, he probably doesn't even know how to talk. Watch out or he'll mop your shoes instead of the floor. Jeremy froze mid-step, face falling. He said nothing and headed toward the back, his shoulders hunched. Malcolm's heart ached. This wasn't just poor service. This was cruelty in uniform. Rivers Diner was supposed to be different. It was born out of his belief that people deserved grace, especially the broken ones. Second chances didn't mean anything if the people inside these walls acted like gatekeepers. He turned slightly on his stool, watching Chad swipe a plate off the pass and deliver it with a grunt. The customer, an older woman, blinked and offered a polite thank you. Chad was already walking away. Brittany passed behind him and muttered, Bet Malcolm's somewhere giving a speech about hope right now, while we clean up after his charity cases. Malcolm took one long breath through his nose. Then another. He had heard enough for today. He left a $5 bill next to his untouched coffee and slid off the stool. As he walked toward the door, he caught his reflection in the glass. Tired eyes, unshaven, heart heavy. He didn't turn back. Outside, the air was sharp, cold but clean. And with every step away from the diner, a plan began to form in his mind. One that would bring him back through that same door, not as a silent stranger, but as the man who built it all. Tomorrow, there would be no disguise. The kitchen at River's Diner was a symphony of sounds. Sizzling pans, clattering plates, and the rhythmic chop of a knife against the cutting board. At its center stood Tony Wilkins, known to most simply as Big Tony. Broad-shouldered and built like a freight train, he moved with surprising grace as he flipped a skillet of seasoned potatoes. Tony had done hard time. He didn't shy away from it. Years behind bars had hardened his exterior, but the day Malcolm gave him a shot, something had cracked open inside him. This place was more than a job. It was redemption, a daily reminder that people could change, and that someone had to believe in them first. The voices from the front weren't meant to carry back to the kitchen, but today they did. Through the swinging door, Chad's sarcasm bled into the kitchen. Just a place for losers and charity cases, Chad was saying. Malcolm treats this place like a rehab center, not a restaurant. No wonder the good customers are leaving. Brittany chimed in, her voice sharp and amused. He probably thinks he's saving the world one pancake at a time. Tony froze mid-stir. His hand gripped the wooden spoon tighter. He listened, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't ignore it. Then he heard Jeremy's name. Heard the way they mocked the kid. Jeremy, who barely spoke, who showed up early and stayed late. Who wiped counters 3 times because he wanted to get it right. Tony remembered when he was that guy. Unsure, ashamed, hoping not to mess up. The spatula hit the grill with a metallic clank. Tony pushed through the swinging door. The noise of the kitchen followed him, but the room fell oddly silent when he emerged. Chad was filling a drink order. Brittany was pretending not to notice him. Tony's voice was deep and calm. You got a lot to say when you think no one's listening. Chad looked up, startled. Hey Tony, just messing around. It's all good, man. Tony didn't smile. That kid you were talking about? Jeremy? He's got more heart than both of you put together. And I should know. I used to be the guy nobody wanted to hire. Nobody trusted. You think this place is soft? Then you don't understand what Malcolm built. Brittany crossed her arms. We're just blowing off steam. It's not that serious. It's serious to the people you're tearing down, Tony said. This ain't just a job. It's a lifeline. You know how many folks in this city get that kind of chance? You think you're better because you've been here longer? You're lucky. Lucky to have a roof, a check, and a place that lets people like us matter. Chad muttered something under his breath, but he didn't meet Tony's eyes. Tony stepped closer. You can hate me. I don't care. But you will not disrespect this place. Or the man who gave all of us a second chance. He turned and walked back into the kitchen without waiting for a reply. The swinging door flapped behind him, then settled still. Back at the grill, the sizzle of potatoes resumed. Tony didn't like causing scenes. He preferred to lead by example. But today, words were needed, because silence would have made him no better than the ones tearing others down. The scent of cooking filled the air again, but something had shifted. And tomorrow, the truth would no longer hide behind swinging doors and quiet corners. The sun hadn't yet crested the tops of the buildings when Malcolm Rivers stepped through the back door of Rivers' Diner. This time he wore no disguise. He didn't need it anymore. The quiet that met him wasn't from lack of activity. It was the kind of silence that builds before a storm. He moved through the kitchen with slow, deliberate steps. Big Tony was already prepping, stacking clean plates and dicing onions. Their eyes met. No words passed between them, but the nod they exchanged said enough. Tony knew what was coming. Maybe everyone did. In the dining area, the early crew was just starting to settle in. Chad and Brittany were by the register, their usual spot. A few others, like Jeremy and Maria, were wiping tables and arranging chairs. The air was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves could sense a reckoning approaching. Malcolm didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped into the center of the room and said, I want everyone to come to the dining floor. Now. They came one by one. Chad glanced at Brittany, his expression unreadable. Maria put down her rag. Even Tony stepped in from the kitchen, folding his arms across his chest. Malcolm waited until all eyes were on him. Yesterday, he began, I sat at that counter for nearly an hour. None of you noticed who I was. That's fine. That's not the point. Chad shifted on his feet. Brittany blinked but said nothing. I came in dressed like a man off the street. Someone who needed a meal, maybe a little kindness. And what I heard, Malcolm paused, letting the weight of silence stretch, was the ugliest thing I've ever heard in this place. He turned slightly, facing each of them in turn. I heard our customers mocked. I heard our values trashed. I heard my name dragged through the dirt by people I trusted. Brittany opened her mouth, but Malcolm lifted a hand. No, let me finish. The group stood frozen, a mosaic of emotions. Guilt, fear, anger. Rivers Diner was built for people like me, Malcolm said, voice steady. People who didn't get handed anything, who made mistakes, who needed a place that believed in them. This isn't just a restaurant. It's a mission. Jeremy looked down at his shoes. Maria wiped her eyes. Malcolm's gaze settled on Chad and Brittany. You don't have to love every customer, but you will respect them. You don't have to like each other, but you will treat your coworkers like human beings. Chad finally spoke, voice low. We didn't think you'd hear any of that. I wasn't supposed to? Malcolm replied. So the problem isn't what you said. It's that I heard it? No answer. He stepped back slightly. This place was founded on second chances. But second chances don't mean anything if people spit on the very idea. The room was still. No coffee brewed. No plates clattered. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. Malcolm took one final look around. We're going to talk more tomorrow, and the next day. But I needed you to hear this from me, not a memo, not a meeting. From the man who built this place with his own hands. He turned and walked back into the kitchen, leaving behind a silence that cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. The next morning, the atmosphere at Rivers Diner was heavy with anticipation. The staff gathered around the worn wooden tables in the back room. Malcolm stood at the head, calm but firm, ready to lay everything bare. He began by recounting the harsh words he overheard the day before. The mocking tones of Chad and Brittany, the complaints about coworkers, the disdain for the customers who walked through the doors every day. Each word hit the room like a weight. Chad's confident demeanor began to crumble. Brittany's eyes darted to the floor. Other employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unable to meet Malcolm's gaze. Malcolm's voice softened but didn't lose its edge. I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to remind you all why this place exists. It was built on respect, on dignity, and on giving people a second chance when no one else would. He looked at Tony, who gave a small nod of encouragement. Tony's story is proof of that. From the streets to this kitchen, he found a family here. That family includes every one of you. A silence fell. Then Maria, the youngest server, spoke quietly. I forgot what this place meant. I got caught up in the stress. I'm sorry. Others murmured their agreement. Chad swallowed hard, finally breaking the silence. I guess I lost sight of what matters. Malcolm nodded. That's the first step. Owning the truth. We all have to do that. He paused. This diner isn't just about food. It's about hope, redemption, and trust. We can rebuild that together. The room, once cold and distant, began to thaw. Faces lifted. Eyes brightened. Malcolm ended the meeting with a simple statement. I believe in this place. And I believe in every one of you. The room was quiet after Malcolm's words. Each person felt the weight of the moment pressing down on their shoulders. This was not just a conversation, it was a crossroads. Malcolm looked around the room slowly. Now it's time to make a choice. You can recommit to what Rivers Diner stands for, or you can walk away. His gaze lingered on Chad and Brittany, the two who had been the loudest critics. Their silence spoke volumes. I'm not here to force anyone, Malcolm said. But understand this, if you choose to stay, it means you respect the values we built this place on. Respect for each other, respect for our customers, and respect for the second chances given to all of us. Some staff shifted uncomfortably. Tony stepped forward, his voice steady. It's not easy to change, but it's worth it. I've been where some of you are now. This place gave me a shot when no one else would. Maria nodded beside him. I'm ready to try again. To be better. Slowly, others began to speak, quietly at first, then with more confidence. They shared their hopes and fears, their regrets and promises. Malcolm listened, feeling the atmosphere shift. The choice wasn't just about staying or leaving, it was about reclaiming pride in their work and in themselves. By the end of the meeting, a line had been drawn. Some faces still held doubt, but most were determined to move forward. Malcolm smiled quietly. We'll take it one day at a time. After the staff meeting, the atmosphere at Rivers Diner began to shift. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. The change wasn't immediate, and it certainly wasn't easy. Old habits and tensions lingered like shadows in the corners of the kitchen and dining area. But beneath it all, something new was taking root. Malcolm watched from behind the counter as customers returned. Some came back hesitantly, still uncertain if the diner was the same place they had loved. Others walked in with cautious smiles, as if hoping the rumors of trouble were overblown. Chad and Brittany, once so quick to sneer and complain, now exchanged fewer harsh words. Their cold stares softened when customers entered, and they began to listen more carefully when Tony spoke during brief breaks. The tension didn't disappear overnight, but cracks in the armor started to show. In the kitchen, Big Tony became more than just the cook. He took on a new role as a mentor, a steady presence for the younger staff who were still learning. His stories weren't just about food or recipes. They were about survival, respect, and the chance to rebuild a life. One afternoon, as Malcolm watched Tony guide a nervous new hire through the steps of washing dishes, he felt a flicker of hope. This was the heart of Rivers Diner, a place where people found more than just meals. They found purpose. Word about the change spread through the community. Loyal customers who had stayed away came back, bringing friends. The diner's booths filled with laughter and conversation once again. The air seemed lighter, the clatter of dishes and chatter blending into a familiar melody. But the hardest part was yet to come. Malcolm knew that sustaining this shift required more than goodwill. It needed continuous effort, accountability, and most of all, trust. One evening, as the diner was closing, Chad approached Malcolm quietly. "I'm sorry," he said, avoiding eye contact. "I didn't realize what I was doing. I want to do better." Brittany stood beside him, nodding. "Me too. I want to be part of this again." Malcolm nodded, feeling a mix of relief and cautious optimism. The ripple had begun, but its reach was still uncertain. As the night settled, Malcolm cleaned the counter, thinking about the long road ahead. Rivers Diner was healing, one small step at a time. The weeks following the confrontation were marked by steady, sometimes fragile progress. Each morning, Rivers Diner opened its doors with a renewed sense of purpose. The worn wooden floors creaked underfoot, but now they seemed to echo with possibility instead of neglect. Malcolm found himself arriving earlier, staying later, observing every detail of the diner's rhythm. It was clear that the change he hoped for would require constant attention. Big Tony had stepped fully into his new role as a mentor. His gruff exterior softened as he took younger staff under his wing, teaching them not just how to cook and clean, but how to carry themselves with pride. The stories he shared, of mistakes made, lessons learned, and second chances earned, wove through the kitchen like a lifeline. Some of the younger employees, hesitant at first, began to open up, trusting in Tony's quiet strength. Meanwhile, Malcolm rekindled the diner's relationship with local rehabilitation centers. He arranged for new hires to come through these programs, offering opportunities to those eager to rebuild their lives. The diner became more than just a workplace. It became a community project, a symbol of hope in a city too often divided. Chad and Brittany, still adjusting, faced their own battles. Their old attitudes didn't disappear overnight, and some days were harder than others. Yet, in quieter moments, Malcolm saw glimpses of change. Small acts of kindness between co-workers, a willingness to listen rather than judge. One evening, a neighborhood family entered the diner, greeted warmly by Brittany, who now smiled without pretense. Their youngest child tugged at her sleeve, asking for a favorite dish. Watching Brittany's genuine care stirred something in Malcolm, a reminder of why he fought so hard to keep this place alive. Not everything was smooth. A few customers still complained about slow service or forgotten orders. Some employees slipped back into cynicism. But Malcolm's presence, steady and engaged, became a force that kept the diner's heart beating strong. He held regular meetings, listening to concerns, encouraging solutions rather than complaints. Behind the scenes, Malcolm also wrestled with his own doubts. Leading by example was exhausting, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. Yet every night, as the last customer left and the lights dimmed, he stood at the counter, reminded that this fight was worth every struggle. The diner's neon sign flickered to life, casting a warm glow on the street. Inside, laughter mingled with the clinking of plates. River's Diner was waking up again, its soul returning, not perfect, but fiercely alive. The morning light filtered softly through the diner's large front windows as Malcolm Rivers stood behind the counter, his eyes scanning the room filled with familiar faces. The clatter of dishes, the hum of conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter formed a comforting symphony. It was the sound of life returning to a place that had once teetered on the edge of losing everything. Malcolm's gaze settled on Brittany, who was carefully balancing a tray loaded with steaming plates. Her movements were steady and confident, a far cry from the harsh demeanor Malcolm had witnessed weeks ago. Chad was helping a new hire, patiently showing her the ropes, a hint of humility replacing his old arrogance. The diner was no longer just a business. It had become a second home. The walls held stories of struggles and redemption, of broken lives pieced back together by the promise of a chance to start anew. For Malcolm, this was the true reward, the knowledge that his fight to protect the diner's soul was not in vain. Tony, standing near the kitchen doorway, caught Malcolm's eye and nodded with a knowing smile. The journey had been long and hard, filled with moments of doubt and frustration, but together they had reclaimed the spirit that made River's Diner special. As the lunchtime rush began, Malcolm took a deep breath and allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but here and now, surrounded by a community that believed in second chances, he felt a quiet hope. River's Diner stood as a beacon, a place where mistakes were forgiven, where dignity was restored, and where every person could find their place at the table.